Hello, hello. Welcome to our NITRO Studio workshop today on functions and workflow actions. Looks like we still have some folks joining a little bit after the top of the hour, so I might just give it another minute or so for people to jump on. So I'm going to go on mute for a little bit and maybe another 30 seconds or so, just let people get settled in and logged on, and we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like still some folks coming in, a few more popping on last minute. That's great. Welcome, we welcome everyone to this workshop today. I'm going to go ahead and get started because I think this is got some ground to cover here. And if you have any questions, we want to make sure we have time for any questions at the end of the workshop. So I'm just going to go ahead and get going. So my name, James Restivo. I am with Crow Canyon Systems. Been here for 8.5 years now. It's been, is that right? 8.5? Yeah, 8.5 years. It's been fun. So what we're going to talk about today on the workshop is using functions and basically syntax in custom actions and workflows. And I want to try to demystify that concept for everyone and try to give you some rules that you can kind of hang on to and think about as you're developing these things, and that should hopefully give you some guidance on what syntax to use and where. So this workshop is geared towards folks who have been using NITRO. So if you're new to NITRO or just taking a look at it, I certainly recommend you talking to Ryan or Scott and maybe getting a trial set up if you haven't already, and take a look at it. But it looks like most of the folks who joined are current users, so you should be pretty familiar with the NITRO tool set. Again, if not, there's some workshops and webinars I can point you to, and I'll point you to those a little bit later. There's a NITRO 101 workshop that I think was done very well. We'll give you a good overview of it, but of course you're always welcome to talk to us directly, send us an email, drop us a line, give us a call. whatever is your most comfortable form of communication, just let us know what your questions might be. Speaking of questions, we do have a questions box in the webinar panel. So you have to go to webinar panel on your screen. There should be a box for asking questions. You can go ahead, pop that out, answer your questions in there. Well, we welcome that at any point in time. I'll keep my eye on the box, but we also have Scott on the call who can help answer questions as well, and anything that doesn't get, even ones that do get answered, we'll revisit as we have time at the end of the workshop to talk about those questions you have. I'm sure a lot of people might get used out of those answers, so we'll go through those. So I encourage you to pop into the questions box if you have any questions at any point in time. If I'm going too fast or you missed something or want me to revisit, this is for you guys to learn about NITRO. So we're happy to have you answer, ask questions, and we're happy to answer them. Okay, so it looks like we're pretty well set with folks joining at this point. So I know there's a few more coming on late, but that's great. Welcome, and we'll go ahead and get going. So just going to give you a quick overview of this workshop, kind of the way we're going to go about it. I'm going to give you a couple resources to work with and look at. So there's going to be this resource of rules that we that we have around the syntax in NITRO. And then there's also going to be a couple articles that we've recently published within the last week or two that you can reference as well. So you can use those as references. I think it's really great to understand the syntax kind of from two different angles. I'm going to give you one angle. I'm going to talk about that one angle from the rules perspective today. And then we also have these articles, and you can kind of see them up on my screen here, where we have the syntax for expressions and actions, workflows, and and NITRO forms. So we'll be getting into each of those as well. I'll kind of walk through those documents also. But what I wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit is we have these three different tools in here where you might see some unique syntax that you might not be used to with other applications. A lot of it is pretty similar to what you know, something similar to what you would get with Excel with some certain functions, but there are some unique things that we're doing in NITRO that are, you know, might be a little, you know, I just want to give you some guidance on what those might be, right? So without further ado, I'll just kind of dive into the rules that we're going to talk about. And there's only 10. And that's all we're talking about, 10 rules here. It's not a heck of a lot. Hopefully this will, you know, you can wrap your head around it. And it's really for all of us to wrap our heads around what's going on with this syntax in NITRO. So I'm going to start here. And we're going to start with rule number 1. And don't pay attention to the order of rules. It's just the order I'm going in. There's no priority or preference on each of these. It's just sort of the way I wrote them off. So don't worry about rule 1 versus rule 10. They're very interchangeable. So don't worry too much about that. But it's just the order we're going to go through today. So rule number 1. In our tool, you have options for referencing the columns in your NITRO forms or in your SharePoint lists. And typically what you're going to do is reference them using this syntax. You're going to have the open square bracket, the column display name, which is what you see in the list view of that list. And then the internal name, which is coming from the list settings of the SharePoint list. You can find both of these if you go straight to that column on the list settings page. You can see the internal name and the display name. You can get both of those. We also have places in our tool set with column mappings, et cetera, where you can directly reference those columns, and we put that syntax in there for you. So you don't have to think about too much. But with this rule, there are a couple exceptions, which is why I wanted to talk about this one first. There's going to be exception number 1, mail templates. Hold on, let me just get it one more. Mail templates. Okay, so in mail templates, we actually reverse that reference for the column. So you're going to have the internal name first, and then the column display name, and you also notice that there's doubling of the brackets, doubling of the piping, and doubling of the end brackets. You usually don't have to worry too much about that with mail templates because here, I'll show you as an example. If you go to a mail template in our form, let's just go through custom actions, probably the quickest one to get there. You're going to be able to select the columns from the right-hand side, and we directly put that syntax in there for you. So you usually don't have to think about it too much, right? It's just double-click it or copy and paste it, whatever the case may be. So let's go to send mail, and we'll pull up a template, a new one, and template. Okay. And new mail template. Let's just pop that open. You see here's your references on the right-hand side. And if I add to subject, add to body, you see it gives me that reference right there, the internal name and then the display name. Right, so you don't have to think about, remember that one too much. It is an exception, but it is also kind of directly available for you to select these columns, and it's going to be pretty easy to just put that in there. So you don't have to remember it really. Okay, so that's how you reference column placeholders for mail templates. But there's actually, oops, what did I do here? Going over. There's an exception to the exception, believe it or not. There actually is an exception to this exception where if you're doing a query list and you want to reference a query list results, you can actually do that. I just noticed a typo here. And you can use this syntax here, but you'll notice that the display name comes first and then the internal name, right? So that's going to be within a mail template, and you have a query list. You can actually, results from whatever query list action you're doing, you can use in the mail templates in this way. And and I'll talk about the percentages a little bit down the line here in a different rule, but essentially that's kind of a way for the system to know that you're using some kind of variable. And there's certain places where it's used. Mail templates is one of them where you use that percentages. But the point, what I want to focus on was the display versus internal. But there are also other exceptions to this. So I'm going to there's a third exception. So if you're doing a form event action, we always use the internal name. So if it's something like you use that one of those QL, CCS, I think we call it, fetch item. And we're going to do the hash. I'll talk about the hash a little bit later. And then we just do internal name. No brackets. So that's another exception to that column reference piece. So it's no brackets around it, no piping, it's just the internal name. Again, that internal name is coming from the list settings page. You go to that list column and you can see in the URL what at the end of it says field equals blah, 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 and that's your internal name. So that's how you use that in form event actions. There's a fourth exception, actually. In custom action builders, we can use an internal name within brackets. So again, that's going to be in this internal name, like that. And custom action condition builder, so what I mean there is if you're in your custom action, let me get back over to this one. This is what I'm talking about here. This condition builder or this condition builder, if you want to use something where you want to check against something else, let's say, images is, no, that's not a good one. ID, all right, yeah, it's giving me a little trouble there. ID is greater than your, was it days old? I think it was a number field. So you can compare like two numbers like that, but that's the internal name reference, and that's going to be another kind of exception to that. Using that piping in brackets, you just put the internal name in brackets. So in this condition builder specifically, that's the type of syntax you would use. All right, and then we actually do have a fourth exception. This one's a little tricky. I was on the fence whether I wanted to include this one or not because it's involving version history. So what we're talking about here is if you have a work log column or basically any multi-line text column that has the append changes to existing text option, you want to get those previous versions. We actually can pull that version history from that field. So we use that in our out-of-the-box tool for help desk. We have a work log column. We can pull that into a mail template. So you can see that version history. And you can see it's got the brackets around it. That means it's double brackets, double piping. Typically means it's going to be in a mail template. Yeah, so that's kind of another exception. But those kind of 5 scenarios, 5 different formats for referring to the column are about it. I mean, there's ways you can reference it from a query list with a hash. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But ultimately, what's happening after that query list hash is the same thing as what you got here, display name, internal name, or in some cases, like in this exception here, actually no, not even that exception. Some cases you might do just the internal name, but only in that form of an action. So kind of like keep that in mind. That's how you can refer to the column. So that's just a few different ways to do that. So that's basically rule number 1. This one has the most exceptions. The rest of them don't have as many exceptions. So this is probably the most complicated one with the different ways we can refer to the different columns throughout the forms and the actions and workflows. So that's that one. And I'll kind of clean this up with formatting and whatnot and get this, share this with everyone or put up as one of our FAQs on our .help site. Okay. Second rule. So condition builders, and this one's a pretty simple one. The condition builders in NITRO workflows only use that before change and after change. So I know some of you on the call, we probably worked with you on different workflows where you can do these before change or after change kind of conditions where you want to see the, after the status is changed to closed, then do something, or once this value is changed to approved, then do something. And this is what we're doing with workflows. And it's only there for workflows because the workflows, as I've said in multiple training sessions, is that it's kind of passively looking for an event to happen on that SharePoint list, whereas the custom actions are you're directly hitting a button for something to happen. So that's where the before change and after change don't really make a lot of sense in the context of the custom action, but in the workflows it does. Just to show you what that looks like for those before change and after change conditions. If you're in NITRO workflows, let me just pop over to that. And again, if you have any questions as we're going through this, anything that's not clear, make sure you ask that question. We want to make sure you kind of get your head around what we're doing here with the syntax. And I say that because this workflow tool is taking a little while to open up. Come on. Okay, here we go. workflows. And I'll do a new workflow. Okay, so then I have to select a list first. Let me select a list. And come down here to conditions. And we can say, you know, something is a status, maybe. Any title, whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's some field, usually a status field, after change. And you can have a direct literal value here, right? So you can have after change is start, like a status or like in progress, right? So that means this workflow will run after that change. We can also do a couple other things where we can do any. So after change any, so any change in that you know, title, or you know, in this case, let's see, do we have a status field? Just trying to see if we have one. No, but let's assume this is a status field. After change any change in that status will run the workflow. After change, in case there's some value, like maybe the title gets blanked out, so after change none, you can use that function as well, or that option as well. That's what I mean. This is only the after change and then before change are only going to be available in this NITRO workflow and only in the NITRO workflow condition builder. So that's another rule to keep in mind. Before change, after change, only here. Okay, and I don't think we have any exceptions to that one. Nope, we're good. All right, rule number 3. Okay, this is where we're gonna start talking about that hash you see in some of our workflows, some of our documentation. So essentially what it is, it's referring to an output of something. So you're basically taking you know, something that happened maybe previously in the custom action or workflow, and like you created an item, or you did a query list, or you have a variable and you want to reference that information, and the hash is kind of the way to do that. So this is where I think I'm going to bring in those articles to kind of talk about this a little more, because I didn't use examples so much in these rules, but if you kind of take this information and match it up to what we have going on in these different articles, you can kind of see how it all fits together. You can see where we're using that hash here. We're using it here for the query list action, and got that display name, internal name, functionality there, where we're referencing something from that query list. So that's where it's kind of coming into play. You know, this kind of gives you where you are in the process of setting things up. You can kind of look on here for reference, but in general, if you're talking about doing some kind of hash thing, you can see where it's being used, and you can kind of see where you bring it into play. Like if we do query list actions, for instance, skip down past that, see where we have it. We have in here, like, yeah, something like this, current action, hash, column internal name, something like that we can put into place. That's actually another exception I didn't put in there. I'm sorry about that. Missed that one. Column internal name is also used here for the current action. Anyway, so let's go back to, actually, you know what, I'm sorry, that's actually backward compatibility. We can still use the column internal display, so it's not really an exception. All right, so just want to make that clear. Can use that display in internal. But in general, if every time you see that hash happening somewhere, you're referring to something else that happened previously, or you're referring to a variable. So that's what we're doing. We're basically taking information from somewhere else and putting it, that we've done it within the context of our action or workflow, and putting it into another piece of that action or workflow. This one didn't have any exceptions, but I think I do mention it in rule number 4 also, because this is specifically referring to variables. So you have your variables. When you set your variables in actions or workflows, you can refer to them using that hash and then the word value. That's going to directly get that value, so you can use that in functions. You can use that in different places within your workflow. And so when you set that variable, you can then reference it. So if you have any questions about the hash or other places to use it, you know, feel free to pop those into the questions box. We'll get to them either, you know, after the web workshop or during the workshop. Rule number 5, really simple. The $ precedes functions. So anytime you're talking about a function, you have the $ preceding it. And that can happen in a couple different places. So that $, those functions happen in, let's kind of show you a couple of places where that can happen, as a matter of fact. So if we go to, well, one of the things you'll see here on these articles, for custom actions, workflows, or forms, you'll see that we reference where you can use those things. So functions can be used in this condition builder. So going back to that condition builder control, we could actually put a function in here if we wanted to, and do something like add, whatever, add number field, which of course is going to be in the brackets. Anyways, the point is you can use that function in there to in that condition builder, which is kind of neat. That's pretty cool. But you can see within this article, these articles here, why these are useful as a kind of companion guide to these rules is that they show you where you can use these things. So functions, will always have that $ before it, and then you'll also have where you can use that. So column mappings, that's another thing where you're updating items or creating list items. Mail templates, can't use them, right? So there it says no. But you can kind of go through the custom actions, the workflows, and the form events, form actions to see where you can use those functions and where you can't. But if you can use it, and then you refer to it with that $, that's basically the rule. That's the only rule there is for that. And also another thing I want to point out to you, since we're talking about functions, is, and we're going to talk a little bit more about functions in another rule down the line here, but we're creating this article to talk about all the different types of functions we have and the different areas and how to use them. It's a little broader of a topic than what we can really dig into, because you can go through each one of these in detail and it could take probably a couple hours. We don't have a lot of time for that, so we want to throw together this, again, reference guide for you to come back to and say, okay, what is add going to do for me? What is divide going to do for me? Well, that's pretty straightforward. But like, what does format value do for me? Things like that we want to describe in this article. So this is another resource we'll have out there for you guys to reference. But the rule we're talking about here is that $ precedes function. So anytime you see that $, we're talking about some kind of function coming after it. All right. And pretty sure there's no exception to that one. Okay. Rule number 6. So there we go. 23 minutes in, we're already halfway through the rules. So these aren't that bad. All right, rule number 6. % can be used to refer to a column variable placeholder within a query. So what I mean by that, and I just want to note here, condition builders are not queries. So there are, even though the control looks very much the same, the condition builder, where we see that on the workflow tool, this condition builder here, the condition builder on custom actions as well, this one up here, this is not a query, so we can't use that % to refer to the variable. But if we're doing a query list, we certainly can. So you go to the query list, and this is where you can do that, use that query builder function right here. I guess select the list first. I'm going to select one. Now this, although it looks very similar to this control up here, it is different. So it's just, you got to know kind of where you're at in the process, where you're at, what are you working with, and to know what the syntax should be. So condition builder syntax we talked about, you can use direct column internal name reference to bring that into the condition builder to check it. There's an advanced condition as well, so you can use like query list and hash with the comma. I'll talk about that as another rule. But the query builder down here is what we're talking about when we're talking about using that % to refer to column placeholders. So we can do like, ID equals, and this one I'm going to get a little more detailed with the lookup ID %. I'll talk about this in a little bit too. Lookup ID. I think it's got to be the internal name. Display internal, something like that. So that % functionality syntax can be used in here within the context of the query builder, but this will not work in here. That's not what it's designed for. So I just want to point that out. That's one area that might be confusing, is that they look very much the same, but the syntax and stuff you could use in the condition builder versus the query list are actually going to be a little different. So, do we have an exception? Form event actions actually have a different syntax where you're referring to a column value with the % in the query. In the form event action, there's a different syntax, and that's actually described in our form event action, kind of NITRO forms form event action section. You can kind of see what that syntax should be for certain things. So it can, I think basically direct value. It's a little different than what we're using because it doesn't have the lookup ID. It doesn't have the parse field value. And again, I'll go over those things in a little bit. But it's a little different. It does use that %, but a couple of differences in how you use it essentially. Rule number 6. Rule number 7. So again, queries have their own unique syntax, as I was talking about, for lookups, IDs, and person or group columns. So this is where I was talking about where I was writing in that lookup ID, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of the unique syntax for queries. And specifically related to lookups, IDs, and person and group columns. And that, again, that is all described in our FAQ here. We can talk about the query list action and the different queries. And you can see here, you got a nice table of the ways you would use the different things. So if you're doing parsing a field value, basically what you're doing is getting the value of that field and you're comparing it against something else. Or the query list column type over here could be a lookup that would fall under one of these two scenarios. But the field you want to get from the main list, the list you're creating that custom action on, essentially, could be single line text or lookup. In those cases, you want to do something a little different, especially if it's a lookup. You want to use that lookup ID syntax. But yeah, that was the idea behind it, is that you have this table that you can refer to that gives you what to use and kind of when to use it. So again, if you're doing some kind of query list, getting category column from tickets list or whatever it might be, based on the type of column it is, you kind of want to look over here and say, okay, what kind of syntax should I use to get the information or compare the information? So if I want to see anything that where the due date is less than or equal to or equals offset days, you can actually use this offset days syntax to subtract the number of days. You can see right here, close date is less or equal to offset days, which is negative 365. So basically anything that was closed more than a year ago, that's what we're going to get from that query. So again, that's unique to the queries, not the condition builder. So again, condition builder and queries are different things. Okay, let's see, no exceptions on that one. Rule number 8. So you've seen probably in a couple of cases this comma function in advanced conditions. And it's really only used in that limited scenario. That's the only place you're going to see it, is the comma. And it's basically just used to compare two parameters against each other. So if you're in, workflow, or I think we do in workflows, sorry. I think it's in custom actions mainly. Again, that advanced condition, I think we talked about this maybe in the previous workshop. I'll go through it again. Do like a query list, item, like got some item back. You want to compare a value from that query list, like the total cost, like that. So now this is going to bring back, let's say we queried a purchase request, and the total cost of that purchase request, we want to make sure it equals or it maybe is greater than, or maybe greater than or equal to some value. And so we could directly use some value here, and that could be 10,000 perhaps, like we want to say it's greater than $10,000 or 10,000 units, whatever it is. Or you could actually do a variable. So if you in some previous function defined your variable and you want to get that, you can do that. So you can actually take the variable, compare it to something else on your from your list, and use that as your condition to determine whether or not this this function or this type of action will continue. So again, that's going to be unique to the condition builder. Again, a little different than the queries. We don't have advanced condition here. We only have it in the condition builder. All right. Is this making sense so far? I mean, anyone, if you're feeling good, put thumbs up or yes in the questions box, or if there's something not quite getting, or if it's going too fast, or just let me know. I like to have feedback on this stuff. All right, so I'll keep plowing ahead here. I'll keep my eye on that questions box. All right, rule number 9. So we have this particular collection value syntax. So this one's a little tricky, but it's only really used in limited use cases. We have, let's say you're getting an array of things. So we can get an array in a couple different ways. I'll talk about those. But then you want to do something with that array, and that's what the @collection value is going to do. So let's say, so for sake of argument, you wanted to create tasks for everyone in a particular assigned team or in a particular SharePoint group. Okay, so let's go over to our list here, and let me go to, where was I? Not that one. Let me go back over here. So I'm just going to take a moment to create a new field here. I'm going to call it assigned team. So I think that's one of the common scenarios. I do have an assigned team. I'll create a new one to call the assigned team for a SharePoint group. And I'm going to do person or group. Of course, that's not an option. Let me go. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. More. Oh, there was a person column. I'm sorry. Well, let's just do it here. Assigned team. Assigned team. Okay. We'll go ahead and create that. Now let's leave it blank. I just need that column for reference in the custom action. So let's say we go to our custom action, and we want to actually we can do something here with a variable, where you can say, okay, let's create a variable. We're going to do group members, and we're going to use that function. And you can use functions here in this variable setup. We're going to do that get sp. Let me see what I put on there. Was it get sp group members? There's okay. Get sp group members, and we're going to take that assigned team. So do assigned. See, display name is team, and I bet it's something like this, right? It's like underscore x0020 underscore team. Again, you can get that value from the list settings. So if I want to go to the list settings and get the exact value, I'm just going to assume it's that for now. But this is going to return an array of people on that assigned team. I'll hit OK. I'm going to close out that, and now I want to create a new action. So let me do add list item, and do create tasks for team members. We're going to run for a variable. So this is where you'd use this option to run an action for a variable, because we've defined something in this variable. We're going to create items in the site. We're going to create them on task. No, I don't have a task list. Well, let's just do, I'll put them in the issue tracker, actually. Whatever the case may be. So you can take that information. Now what we can do is take this and say, you know what, I'm going to take the assigned to field, and I want to create a task for everyone in that collection. So this works here. That array is going to be referenced because we're creating this add list item for that variable, where we define what is in that variable, which is the group assignment. So you take that @collection value. That's only going to work basically in the scenario where we have some kind of array that's returned. It's really only going to work with variables that return an array. It's not going to work with queryless items that return an item collection. It's only going to work with variables that return an array. And that could also be like a split. I think you saw that function when I was looking at the variables. You take the split of some field. Let's say you have multiple users in a field. You want to separate them by semicolon. You can take each of those users and create tasks for them. Basically create the variable that has those users in that array, and then use the @collection value to get those members, and it'll iterate through that array and create an item for each one of those people. And then you can add, of course, you can map the field to other things as well. Create other things like due date. I don't know. I don't have due date on there, but whatever the case may be, you can map other columns as well and create that. But that's where that @collection value is going to come into play, is when you're using an array based on a variable, and that's kind of like, create the variable, create the variable, define the array in the variable, and then use that array in your functions to create items or update items or whatever it might be. That's really the only place you're going to see that at collection value. I think it's pretty cool. It's actually a pretty neat function. But that's the only place we're using it. That's really the idea behind the rules, that it's really only used in that scenario. But it is pretty powerful, and no exceptions, of course. All right, good. And then rule number 10, in general, when we're talking about functions, they typically have 2 arguments. So most of these functions you're going to see on this list here, or when you're looking at those column mappings or whatnot, you're going to see most of them have one parameter at the front, one parameter at the back. Like date, this one's going to add a number of months to a date time field. Like maybe you want to set a expiration date 12 months in the future. You do expiration date, and then 12 as your number, and those are the 2 parameters. You will, there's a few that have 1. I'll talk about the, you have exceptions, of course. But in general, these functions have essentially 2 parameters, 1 or 2. Rare cases will have 3. And there are a couple of use cases where there's any number of parameters, but most of the time you're going to be looking at 2 parameters, and most of the time that's pretty much defined in your, when you look at the column mappings, you'll see those 2 parameters. Like if we go here, let's go to this one, update list item, and look at our predefined column values, add column mapping. It kind of tells you what it is. Get user attribute, like requester, and then what type of attribute, like email, right? So we could get the user, the assigned to person's email, maybe assigned to person's manager or something, whatever it might be. Format value has 2 parameters. There's a few like string concatenation where you can have any number of parameters. There are a few like that, but most of them just have 2. And of course, there are exceptions. So arithmetic functions have like add, product, and subtract. And there's also some function in workflows, which should be in here as well. You can add some. Are going to accept. Actually, I don't think some accepts more than 2. So I'll have to pause on that one. Anyway, I'll double check that one on some, but most of them, all 3 of these are going to allow any number of parameters in that function. So you can add any number of date fields, or number fields. Excuse me, number fields. Add a number of number fields. Add a number of like an add, or multiply them out, or use a subtraction to do it. You can subtract all like 3 number fields, just put it all together. And then you can take multiple argument. These will take multiple arguments, but divide is one which probably sensibly only takes 2 parameters, right? So you got divide. You're going to take the top. The first number will be the top numerator, and the second number will be the denominator of that division, and that's going to be your divide. And only will take those 2. If you add more, you can, but it's not going to recognize that there's any more than 2 parameters in that divide function. It'll just look at the first 2 and ignore everything else. So that's one of those exceptions about basically having 2 values. And as I mentioned, there are some that will take 1 parameter, like parse user value will take 1 parameter. Essentially, that's going to get something. If you have person or group field, it's going to get like the person's name, essentially, that you can then use in other parts of your workflow. And then and there's others like that, those parse field value, parse user value, ID, lookup ID, those kinds of things will take one parameter. And it's only looking at 1 field at a time. Then for the third exception, we're talking about ones that use 3 parameters. And essentially what these are is like, okay, what's get the group members? So yeah, I should have actually added a couple of things to that, SP group members. And this is where you can go to our, once we get this article up and published, you can take a look at it and see that, where is it, get SP group members. There's a display value, which is what parameter do you want to get for that user? What's going to be the, or those users, what's going to be the separator that you want to return, and then what's going to be the field. So going back to that custom action I developed over here. If I go back to this one, this actually was set up incorrectly. My bad. Sorry about that. Name like that. So it really is using 3 arguments there, otherwise it won't really work. So you want to get the name, or let's say you want to get the email, and create, maybe you want to parse this into a mail template or something like that. You can get their email separated out by the semicolon, and here's the, that's the field where that SharePoint group lives to parse out and get that array. But yeah, things like that. And there's a couple of those, like variable collection. That's something else we can talk about in a little bit. But you can see those ones have like 3 different 3 different parameters. You can see what those are. Kind of same idea here again. Different parameters for the user, property, things like that. Let's see, there's no variable collection. Again, we have a placeholder, and I guess the 3rd one's an optional, but it could have 3. And that was it for generally the rules. Oh, and one other thing, one other rule actually I do want to add on here that I forgot to put on here. Rule 11, you can't nest functions. Sorry, nest. Can I spell nest? No, I can't. Nest. Okay, there we go. You can't nest functions. So what I mean by that is you can't take the, you can't put a function within this function. So the way you would do this, though, let's say you wanted to do a variable here. Let's say you wanted to take, kind of complicated, let's say it's a fair, not really complicated mathematics, and certainly could do this with a custom or calculated field, but just to kind of give you an example, let's say you wanted to take, let's see, add sum, like a sum of something, some numbers. And we're going to get a sum of the numbers, and we're going to use that add function. I know I have these fields, and actually what I'm going to do, let me pause on this one. So I actually have this over here. And I will note, these internal names were defined by SharePoint for me. I would not have chosen that internal name. I don't know why I chose that internal name with the X004E. So that's something SharePoint did, and that's something I had to go to the list settings to see what was the actual internal name of these fields. But let's say I wanted to take the addition of these 3 number fields. Hit OK. OK, back here, and we'll do a sum. Oops. And then I'll put my function in there. So now I've got my function of adding. So now I've got a number here of these 3 number fields from this item. And I can now use that. So if I want to go here to update the list item, let's say I wanted to update the total field. There's a total field on here. And let's say I want to update that total field with a product of that, the addition of those 3 fields plus something else. So now, I mean, I can't, this won't work to do add within here. It just won't. Num1, num whatever. I mean, I don't have the exact, I'm not gonna write out the exact syntax. It's kind of crazy, but yeah, you can't do that. So that's where those variables come into play. So I do sum hash value. So now that's my value, that's my variable I just created with that nested function, with that function. So now I've kind of created a end run around that restriction on nesting functions. So I put that function in a variable. I got a number. Now I'm going to take that number and multiply by something. Maybe I want tax rate and do like 0.08, like for sales tax for Rhode Island. Ridiculously high in my opinion, but anyway. I want to sum up the total cost and get like a tax rate or something like that. And then so this is how you would nest those functions. And that was kind of the final rule I wanted to put out there, is that you can use functions and variables. So that gives you a way to work around it, but you can't nest functions within functions. All right, so that's that. Action title. So yeah, that's basically the rules that we're talking about here. Again, it's all right. So I said 10 at the beginning. I added 1 at the very end. I apologize. I kind of misled you at the beginning. 11 rules to think about. Really, the most complex one we're talking about here is what the column formatting should be when you're referring to a column value. But again, a lot of that is described in these articles we have up here that we just created for the there's one for custom actions. So syntax for expressions and custom actions, syntax for expressions in NITRO workflows, and syntax for expressions in NITRO forms. So those are the three areas that you can take a look at using the syntax and use it to your advantage to build out really interesting workflows and really complex kind of stuff with nesting, using collection values and stuff like that. It's not that, it seems daunting at first. I'll be honest. When I was preparing for this webinar, it did seem like, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to show this or describe this to people? So it was a little daunting, and I appreciate that it is, and that's why I'm hoping these resources and this information will get you to a point where it's not as confusing or as mystifying as to why we're doing what we're doing. So I hope that is what you take away from this workshop, and certainly open to any questions if you have anything that you want to dig into, or maybe use cases or examples that you want to ask about. Feel free to put those in the questions box. We got a few minutes left here, so pop those in if you want to. Yeah, Scott, do you want to chime in on something?
Yeah, just about, there are a number of resources that we have available with this. Not only do we have the support chat, the support forum, we have the knowledge base. Of course, we're available by email all the time, and it can help out with any particular syntax or function, issues or how to set it up, how to do this, why something isn't working, and so it isn't like you're left to fend on your own on this. We're very much here to help. A lot of you know Pavan. Pavan's very good at this. James is very good at it. We have a few other people here also who know this intimately, and hopefully that documentation that James has put together and is improving will help a lot also to do this, because it's an enormous range of functions and capabilities that NITRO Studio has. Now, most of you know that a lot of what goes on with NITRO Studio can be done through simple UI, the interfaces that we have already. They're easy to use, and this is the more complicated stuff when you want to get a lot of particular kinds of functionality and workflows going. And at the same time, we are working with NITRO Studio to make as much of this as available through kind of wizards and simple UI as we can. Some of it we can't, but some of it is, we don't want to make it too easy for us, right? You gotta have some kind of hey, it isn't worth it if you don't have to struggle a little, right? I don't know. No, anyway, I'm just kidding about that. But it's no worse than Excel formulas and things like that. So it's like it's kind of like Excel. When you say, James, where most you can do in Excel, you can, once you know it pretty well, you don't need to ever go into the functions. But when you do, it's great. I do a lot of concatenation with Excel, or summation, sigmas, that kind of stuff. So there's some ones that you're going to find are quite useful. So you don't have to know all this, but you might find some that are really useful. Like the variables is very good that James was talking about, and the string concatenations and the sums and all that. So, out of all this amount of material, probably some 10% of it might be ones you actually use and get real familiar with. But it's good to know what's available. And I just wanted to say that, James, you did point, I guess most people know our support resources pretty well, and knowledge base and all that, right? So.
Yeah, and I will point out too, and I'll get this cleaned up with formatting and whatnot, but we have our community forum. If you're not already a member of that, go ahead, feel free to sign up, participate, involved. We see we're actively participating. We have customers actively participating, kind of help each other, and ask your questions, anything that's confusing or you don't quite know. I'd encourage you to use it to go through the forum. For that, because I think it is a great way to build up a repository of information that you can refer back to. It doesn't get lost in your email, like, oh, what was the response to that? Oh yeah, let me go look up that topic that was on the forum. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, I know a lot of you have, I see a lot of familiar names on here that have already signed up, but if you haven't, go ahead and do so. I encourage that. I'll also point out, as in addition to the resources we talked about, there's also these workshops we have, where there's the one we're talking about today, but we're going to move into a few other things, talking about enhancing the UI of NITRO forms. I think that's going to be a really cool thing to take a look at. And I'm going to, this one, I'm going to put a little caveat on. This one is probably going to get pushed off because we actually have a new and exciting development coming down the line. It's probably a couple months away, but we developed some kind of, just give you a quick preview, we developed some kind of control flow function. We haven't released it because I think it's not quite the right thing right now, but we do have a better and more improved thing coming down the line, and just kind of tease that a little bit. We're, keep stay tuned. I'll have a workshop about it when it's ready, but it might be a little ways down the line. So this one might not be about this control flow, it might be something else, but we do have a couple things coming on. You can also, as always, look at our previous workshops and get a reminder or primer, primer on some of the things we've talked about in the past. Of course, we also have other webinars that Scott or Ryan will be doing to talk about.
I've got one next week on bots.
Yeah, so that's going to be a good one on bots and how to use bots and teams.
It's kind of fun.
What's that?
Kind of fun to do one on bots.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that NITRO Studio 101 I was talking about. If you're not yet familiar with Nitro, you can go dive into that one, and a bunch of other resources. We were, obviously we're doing these a lot, so we're getting a lot of videos out there. So, hours and hours of content for you.
We're also developing more sophisticated purchasing and contract management applications. With the contract management is really subscription management or software license management. We call them contracts, but that's kind of a broad term. There's also license management, subscription management, warrant, support agreement management. So if you're interested in things that involve purchasing or subscription license kind of management, we're doing a lot in that realm. And as we're doing that, we're also improving the interface for Nitro, giving it more flexibility. And that's where the themes one that James is talking about. What's that? 2 weeks, James? Is that one? That's gonna. You can do amazing things with the themes in Nitro forms to make the UI of the form look much, modern, softer, different colors. We're gonna do things where you make the buttons rounded. These are UI things, but they really help the user experience with it. So we have quite a lot of interested in developments coming down the pike. And thank you everyone for being so interested in Nitro and using it. And we really welcome any feedback.
Yep.
And on how to improve it or enhance it or whatever, or what you need.
Yeah. Exactly. So, yeah, if you if you have any questions, certainly feel free to pipe in. Hopefully, I gave everyone. Seems like there are no questions, so I guess everyone understood what I was talking about. So that's good. I'll take that as a good sign. If you have any feedback or anything you want to follow up with us on, we're here and always available via email and happy to chat with our customers. So. Again, thanks for joining. Appreciate all your time, and we will be, having our next one soon, and we'll talk to you guys soon. All right, take care, everyone.
Okay, thanks, James.